All right, if everybody can see my screen, what I'm going to be, and if everybody can hear me, what I'm going to be demoing today is the checkbox list with nested radio buttons. Let me get to this project here, and let me show you the problem that we have first and how we fix that. I'm sure everybody who's on the call is familiar with the checkboxes of radio buttons, and when you have branching logic to show and hide those groups. So if you have a checkbox that needs like a subcategory and they check that value, and then a radio button options appear, but they appear below. So let me open up this survey here and show you what I'm talking about. So this is just a small chunk of the project I was working on this week to help out a different group, and they had the issue where they wanted to be able to show these. I highlighted them blue just so we could see them easier. Whenever they check the checkbox for this value, they wanted the radio buttons to appear below that value. Now in the past, we've told everybody that it can't be done because you can't break up the checkboxes. If you want your checkbox field together, you can't inject radio buttons in between those values. So we're kind of tricking the eye, so to speak, because we're not really injecting these radio buttons, but it looks like we are. And one of the big issues of having these radio buttons separate is that sometimes you don't know that when you've clicked on a checkbox, you don't know that the radio button options have appeared because of that. And I'll show you what I mean. So when I click on this first one, you see that these college-based programs appear at the bottom. But if I click on the second one, you don't really see anything happening unless you're paying attention to the scroll bar here on the right. You don't really think anything's happened. And same thing if I check on these. But if we scroll down, you'll see that these radio buttons have popped up. And so you wouldn't know that you're affecting these radio button options by clicking on these. And so it's easy for somebody to miss that you're asking them to, for example, which T32 training program are you enrolled in? They might just think that that's a separate question, and they might think, well, I've already answered that, and then move on. So the way we fix that is using the REDCap CSS Injector. So this is the second survey that I created, and as you can see, it looks identical to the previous one. But now when I click on the college and department, those radio buttons appear within the list, and I can check it. And if I uncheck this and go back to it, that value's gone. So it resets when it hides. But if I check on any of these values that are blue, you'll see that these radio buttons pop up within this checkbox list. Now, as I was going through this, one of the things that made me realize that this was possible is that when REDCap designs, when you create a checkbox field, REDCap creates a column for every value in that field and then gives it a value of 0 or 1 based on whether it's checked or unchecked. Not like a radio button. A radio button, it only creates one field and puts that radio button value in there. So if you have 10 radio value options, it'll go 1 through 10. Whereas the checkbox will create a separate field or a separate column in the database for your checkboxes. They'll be named like current _ training _ 1 _ 2 _ 3 _ 4. So they're not very informative, but it puts in the value of whether it's checked or unchecked. So since there's a separate column for every checkbox value, I had the idea that maybe we can just break up the checkboxes and give each checkbox its own value, and then organize the checkboxes and radio buttons together to where it creates this sort of cascade and flow for these radio buttons and checkboxes. So let me show you the project in the designer so you can see what I'm talking about. So this first instrument is the instrument where you have your checkboxes grouped together, and then these are each of your radio button options down here. Now in the second one, I have each option separately, and I just have it set as value, each one gets a 1. But because of checkboxes, it only puts a 1 or a 0 if that's checked or not checked. And I've labeled these, instead of them being training 1, training 2, training 3, I've labeled them as the values, so that way when you export the data in the database, you'll see that this column is more descriptive. It's like, you have this step-up column, you have this keys column, you have this honors college column. And then
also note that there was no label.
Right, that's very important. In the previous one, as Terry pointed out, there is a label up here at the top for the checkboxes. So when you go in here, you've entered this, and what I've done is created that as a separate label here. So now I have all my checkboxes, and then as soon as I get to this checkbox here where I want my radio button to appear, that's where I add my radio button group, and then I set the branching logic to where if this is equal to 1, show me this, or hide it if it's unchecked. And then I go down here, and then the next group that I have that I want extra specificity, my radio button group, I put that here. And so all I have to do is put the radio buttons underneath the checkbox that I want to show or hide. And then, so you're thinking maybe that's easy. We could have done this a long time ago. So let me show you how I'm able to do this. The reason I'm able to do this and make it look the way it does isn't just because I've organized them in that way. I'm cheating because I'm using the REDCap CSS Injector external module to style it in the same way that you would see it if it was a checkbox list that was together. So let me show you how it looks without that. Let me go to this and disable it. So this is how it would look if you don't have the CSS Injector. And it's not bad. It still separates everything, and you still get that sort of nested look, but it's not as clean. So what I have to do, and let me show you what we have to do to fix this in the CSS. So I'm just going to inspect one of these elements here, and you can see here that in this table row, they're listed as table rows. Within them, there are 2 table data cells, and one of them is called label RC question num column -1. And this one, so if you have a question number, that's where that value goes. And then this is your field number. And that is label RC column -11. Now if you look down here, you'll see that this has the ID. So for HTML, whenever you give something an ID in CSS, you use the #. So this is # step _up -tr, and that step _up is the name of my field label. And then all I have to do is hide this bottom border, these bottom borders, to make them clean, and then I have to shift the spacing. So right now, if we look at this right here, and we scroll down and look at the size, it's adding extra spacing. So here you can see that it's giving a padding of 15 on the top and 15 on the bottom, which gives it extra space. We got to remove that. So that's what I use the CSS Injector for. And it might look daunting, but it's actually really easy, because every one of these, once you know which rules you have to change, it's the same for every one. And if we look at this keys field, you'll see here that now what it is it's the same question num call -1, but this changes. So every table row has the ID of the field name. So as long as you know what your field names are, you can create the rules to hide these borders and to close the spacing. So let me show you how that is shown in the CSS Injector. So let me enable this module again. And as always, if you need us to enable a module, just feel free to email us at redcap@email.arizona.edu and let us know the project name or project number. So when I go into the configuration for this, I tell it, so I enable it, and then I tell it if I want it for survey or data entry or the instrument view. And right now I just have it set for all. And if I leave this blank, it'll apply it to all forms. But right now I just want it to apply to my nested radio buttons example. And here's all of the CSS. And it's hard to see in here, so I have it open in my text editor right here. And let me make this bigger so everybody can see it. So I know this looks like a lot, but really it's because we have a lot of fields. So there's not much going on. So here's an example that I created that just has a couple of fields. So you can see that there's really not much to it. The first rule that up here that we want to apply is there's a div that has a space class that REDCap generates for every field, and basically what it does is it gives extra space in between fields. And so we're just setting all that margin and padding to 0. And that applies for surveys and instruments. The next thing we want to do is we want to remove the bottom border, and we want to set the padding for the checkboxes. So remember, it had a padding of 15 on the top and 15 on the bottom. So now I'm setting it to where I'm spacing it to where it looks proper. And so these values aren't as important. But what's important is the two things that I showed you earlier. So this would be your label name. And as long as you have your label name and then -tr, because REDCap automatically appends this -tr at the end of your field name when it creates a table row. You have one table data cell with this value, and you have this is the field, and then this is the question number. And so as long as you create these two values for every field that you have, you'll be able to hide that border and change the padding. So that's for the checkboxes. And then, I take it back. This is for the label. So in the, let me save this. So this is for this label here. So if you don't have a label, you don't have to use that part. But I have to apply these rules to the label as well. So when we go back to so this is for the label. This is for the checkboxes. So I'm removing the padding on top and bottom, but I'm adding padding on the left and right. And then so this would be the first field name. So I just gave it a generic checkbox field name -1, and it's -tr. So these two are the same, but one applies to the field and one applies for the question number. And then this would be like your second one, just to give you an example. And if I had a third one, what I would do is I would just copy this. And you have to make sure that everyone ends in a comma except for the last one. So if I had 3 fields, then I would just go in and add the third one like this, and so on and so on. So this would be for all of the checkboxes for your survey. Same thing for your radio buttons. Now I just have this as generic button, radio button group name 1, and this is the column, the field column, and this is the question number. And what you could do is these could really go in the same group as this. The only reason I have a separate CSS rule for this is because I'm adding extra padding on the left to push those radio buttons in to make them, you know, indent, so that way you see that they're kind of a subgroup of this. If I didn't, the radio buttons would just line up straight down and it might be confusing. So that's the only reason I've created this as a separate rule. And once again, if I wanted to create another rule, or if I had three radio button groups, I would just rename this as 3. And these would be your fields. So don't think you have to name them this way. This would be like the step-up program, and this would be the keys program. It's just whatever your field name goes here. And this is it. Just this bit right here is what you need to display the data, the checkboxes, radio buttons for your survey the way we have them. These down here are for the instrument view. So let me show you that. So this is for the survey, but if we go into adding a new record here, and this is the first one, so you'll see we have the same issue where if I check on these, they just go down like that. But if we go to the next one, there's different rules that apply to the instrument view that don't apply to the survey view. So when REDCap generates the HTML for a survey, it's the classes are a little bit different than what it does for the instrument. So in order to have the same display in the data entry view, we have to give it different rules. So that's what these rules are for down here, and it's almost identical. So this is for the label, and the difference between this label here and this label here is that instead of it being call-11, it's call-12. That's the only difference. So if it's a survey, it's call-11. For a data entry view, it's call-12. And then the nice thing about the data entry view, or the instrument view, is that you don't have this question number column. So you only have to add the one that you're going to change just for your field name. So here we have field name 1, and we have call-12, and field name 2 and call-12. And once again, if I want to add another field, I would just put a comma here and change this to column 3. Now, same thing, I'm applying the same rule to the border and the padding, so really I could just put all this together with this. I've separated it for you just so you can see the difference between the survey and the instrument. But you know, if you're doing this yourself, you don't have to duplicate these rules. And then the other big thing is that in the instrument view, you get the history button and the comments button. So let me go in and edit the CSS and show you what happens when we don't take those out. And of course it's hard. I really wish I would let you make this window bigger. So let me just do it here. So if I take these out, you'll see here now that the borders and padding are gone, but this all these history, and it pushes the padding. I mean, it basically shoves everything and gives everything a big space. So what we want to do is we want to just take those out. And Terry pointed out that you can still access the history in the logging for these fields. And Terry and I agree that it's kind of a trade-off. You kind of get the nice display, or you kind of get the history. I mean, there might be a way for me to use some CSS rules to tuck these under or put them next to it, and but that was kind of out of the scope of this demo for now. So let me go back and fix these the way it was. So that is down here, and this would be for the checkbox and radio button groups. And what you do is it's the same thing where you just have your field name, and then all it is .fl table, because that's the class that you're giving, that you have, where that's how the HTML is set up, where it's storing those icons, the history and comment icons. So all I'm doing is I'm saying just don't display any of those. And the same thing as before, if I wanted a new one, I would just copy and say that this is group 3. As long as I have one for each field, that's the important thing. And then the bottom is for the radio button, and it's similar to the top. And once again, the only difference between this radio button rule here and this radio button rule here is that it's column-12 instead of col-1. And that, the rules are exactly the same. So that's everything for that project.
Emmanuel?
Yes.
Can you just reiterate for people, since you showed this in a previous video, but can you reiterate what the need is for the important exclamation mark following some of that code?
Oh, sure. So for CSS rules, it's CSS, it's cascading style sheets, and that means that you could have styles in multiple places, and depending on where they are, that's how your web page is designed. That's how the server knows to apply these styles. And Terry makes a good point, because like in the next demo I'm going to do, this is like CSS inline style. So I'm applying the styling directly in the HTML, whereas here I'm putting it in a separate CSS file. Now you can have multiple CSS files, and if we look here in the survey, you can see here that there are other CSS rules that are being applied. And what the important does, when I say that this is important right here, it means that there could be another rule for border bottom. And actually there is another rule for border bottom. It sets it as a 1 pixel border. And what I'm saying is, overrule that rule with mine. Mine is the most important, so do what I tell you to do and make it 0. So if we go here to the let me find the, so you'll see here that this is my rule here, and if I uncheck my rule, you can see that the border is being applied now. That's because the border is being set down here. So if I uncheck this, you can see that this border rule gets applied, and this is stored within the REDCap. REDCap has its own CSS file that has its own rules, because this is how it displays natively for everybody. But what I'm doing is I'm saying overwrite this rule. Now I can't go into their CSS file and just delete this rule, but I can overwrite it with my own. And the way I do that is with the important indicator here. That's a good question, Terry. So does anybody have any questions about this demo before I move on to the next one?
Just understand, everybody, that that's a lot of stuff to look at, but in reality, it's not too difficult, especially if you're familiar with HTML and CSS injection, and but one way or another, if you have questions about this, then just email us at redcap@email.arizona.edu, and we can help you through some of your questions so that you can learn how to do this for yourself, which is the goal. So yes, there's a lot here, but we certainly can help you with any of your projects if you want to incorporate this. Like Manuel says, once you get the hang of it, then you can reuse this over and over again.
Right, and then what I'm going to do is I'll create I'll create a project that just has these generic checkboxes and radio buttons. That way you're not having to wade through this whole thing. But I'll create a generic project that has a couple of nested radio buttons and some checkboxes. And then I will upload those when I do the video, so that way you can download the project and download the CSS file. And that way you can see how it works, and then you can tinker with it from there, and it'll be like a template that you can copy and paste into your own project. And as long as you know which values to update, like this, as long as you know that becomes your radio button field name, then you can take this template and just apply it to whatever project you want, however you organize it. So we'll do that for you too.